Yo, what is up, everybody? The first big Frostfall tournament is this weekend on Sunday, June 23rd. What are you side decking? Now, in the past, it's been base set pretty clearly. You bring your side deck, and it's basically the same for everybody. You bring, your Pandora's boxes, maybe an extra Poisonous Barrow that's not in your main deck, maybe a Tech Spirit or two for the Eruption plans or for the Tsunami stuff. But there's a lot more options, a lot more decks to worry about going into Frostfall. So what are you playing against? New kid on the block. You got 3-ish Frost decks to worry about. I'll say 2.5. We'll get into that in a little bit. You got Lakagon to worry about now. You have Thunder Nexus still being that boogeyman out in the field. You have even Fruit, my favorite, is up and running as a competitive deck. Fire has some competitiveness that you might run into. So your side deck is going to be a lot more interesting and nuanced for your matchups than I think it was in the past, as well as Frostfall brought all sorts of new tools to run into your side deck. So let's go over kind of the decks you might run against and what you're probably bringing up against them. Before that, hey, if you guys didn't know, I do now have a referral link to the Shop Elestrals website down below in the description. If you click on that link and purchase anything through the Elestrals website from that link, you support me, I get a little bit of a commission. So I'd appreciate it if you guys do that for all your Shop Elestrals purchases to help support me, as well as liking and subscribing as always. Let's jump into the rest of the video. So let's start with the new stuff, right? So first of all, brought all these new tools that we have to side deck. Let's start by looking at the new decks that you're going to be playing against. And I mean very new decks, right? We have a bunch of Frost decks that you kind of have to worry about, but let's start with Morfrost, since Morfrost is kind of a package that can be included in the next two decks. Stopping Morfrost. Tried and true, Pandora's Box. The deck loves to search out Lycan to get its engine started. Either Pandora's a Narpoon or Pandoring a Lycan from hand, because there's no other way to interact with Lycan otherwise, is a great way to stop that Orderly Morfrost engine. Other tools against Morfrost is going to sound a little surprising, but Cockadoodle actually has some pretty interesting matchups against Morfrost, where if they play Indus, you can play turn 1 Cockadoodle to suppress the Indus, attack over Indus without losing a back row, so you gain your ability against an Indus to set back row without worrying too much. Additionally, if they play an Abominable, you can play Cockadoodle, suppress the Abominable stat back down to 1 attack, and beat over it. So Cockadoodle also has some pretty interesting stuff. Otherwise, against Morfrost, you're generally looking at things to maybe pop the Indus without combat, like a Kinleo or just your Invoke runes, etc. And then just try to slowly stall them out of the game, so any kind of counter runes to do that will help as well. Moving on to the Cryoscorch stuff, or specifically Cryoling. Cryovert is what you're worrying about against that deck. The best things you can run against that deck are generally Invoke removal, because that Cryoling is going to be sort of immune to Tsunami. Poison Tipped Arrow is a great matchup against the Cryovert, because if they go Cryovert and you go Poison Tipped Arrow, that Cryovern's got 5 attack and will die, so your walls will generally be defended. Remember that Tsunami is basically offline against Cryovern decks. You might want to take the Tsunamis out, add the PTAs, add more Invoke removal so you can just roil it away the next turn, maybe Earthquake it away. Expect to see turns where they drop 2 at the same time, so being able to PTA 1, next turn maybe Earthquake the other, to end their kind of late game board, because when they get the Cryoverns out, that means they're basically at half spirits or less, so it's okay to burn a little bit more to get rid of them, and then pressure from there, because now they're out of that tech. Most decks run 2, some run 3 Cryovern you might have to worry about, but if you get rid of 2 Cryovern, you're generally smooth sailing, assuming they're not also running Abominable package on the side. And then lastly, the Frost Nexus stuff, the Shiver Roar stuff, the big beater that he is. You can kind of run a lot of the tech options. We talked about Frost in general already. However, Lavalith also can come into play to knock out that stadium, because they're going to have tons of spirits over you. Knocking out the stadium to attack something else on the side might help, or being able to place your stadium to stop the protection of the Shiver Roar is also a fantastic option. Even if you're playing Frost, being able to play a Misenchanted Boreas, shutting off Shiver Roar is a fantastic way to be able to then go and Earthquake it away. Maybe even Royal if it's the only thing on the board. It's likely not the only thing on board, but it's an option. Or if, again, you're playing Fire, you play Lavalith into your stadium, you now pop their stadium, and you can swing over Shiver Roar with now your 8 attack, unless they misenchant Shiver Roar for some reason with Fire. They're not doing that. So those are some pretty good side deck options against Frost decks. Next up, we're going to talk about Lakagon. That's probably the only really big water-relevant deck that you're going to be going against, and it's a boogeyman right now. The format, it is pretty powerful control deck that we haven't really seen a ton of being competitive in Elestrals in the past, so a lot of people aren't used to playing against it. How do we counter Lakagon going into Game 2, Game 3? And this might sound a little weird at first, but Divine Blessing is actually a phenomenal card to go against Lakagon with. Generally, they're a stall deck that will kind of let you sit a lot of Elestrals and defense on board because they're going to go tsunamis, shields, poison arrows, drop a bunch of defensive bodies. They're not really attacking unless they get their galaxy out. So, being able to build a board up, Divine Blessing is online pretty often, which is the downside of Divine Blessing normally. You can use that Divine Blessing in a few key spots to stop Lockagon. If they play the Lockagon already, you will be able to use Divine Blessing to stop Ambrosia plays, to stop Rise from the Depths plays is the second big one. Being able to stop Rise from the Depths from being cast can either stop them from ascending into Lockagon that turn, or even potentially stop them from comboing into a bunch of other recovery options outside of Ambrosia, so Divine Blessing is a really good silver bullet against a chunk of what the deck's trying to do. Additionally, you might be able to save, a creature from an Earthquake or a Royal that might play, because again, they're playing stall, they're playing control deck, they can just sit there and recover all day while slowly picking away your board before they win. So Divine Blessing is a really good deck against that control matchup. Additionally, you're running 3 Gorgons already, probably already good. PTA might be good against Lockagon. After they board wipe you, you can lock on before they recover something to pop it, but even that's a little 50-50. The best thing you can do is definitely Divine Blessing. Next up, what do you bring against Fruit? It's pretty obvious if you looked at the card pool. Here's where Frostfall kind of shines. So first off, Fruit is extremely weak to Gorgons. You Gorgons that Drataya turn 1, turn 2, whenever it starts trying to go off, that's your best play with Gorgons. Just hit the Drataya, maybe the Lockagon, stop them in their tracks there. Even a late game Gorgons on a Pandasin might be relevant, but you're already running Gorgons. So what else are we running? I think it's pretty obvious. You run Poison Nectar. If you Poison Nectar or Drataya trigger, they'll still get the recovery from Ambrosia, but that Poison Nectar will destroy the Drataya on the spot, making them unable to continue their draw engine for that turn. They'll have to play another Drataya. Maybe they've already burnt, Ambrosia to try to dig for them. So, straight up Poison Nectar, Gorgons, fantastic options to do with Drataya. Additionally, another case where Divine Blessing might be relevant, they are trying to cast Invoke Runes, whether that's Rise from the Ashes, Ambrosia, or Cornucopia. They have a lot of Invoke Runes in the Fruit deck, so being able to stop them from casting Invoke Runes, remember casting is specifically the resolution of. So if you stop them from resolving Ambrosia, Cornucopia, or even a Rise from the Ashes in the mid game, that will burn them for a ton of spirits because now they don't get their recovery and they don't get their draws or pops from Lockagon and Drataya. Another fantastic way to deal with those decks. So those 3 cards, pretty straightforward. Gorgons, Poison Nectar, Divine Blessing will shut down Fruit pretty consistently. Take it from the Fruit player. Those are my worst nightmares. Generally, those stop the deck from functioning at all, and you just get run over from there. Next up, we'll go into the boogeyman of the format of past, and it's still here, which is Thunder Nexus. Another deck that kind of is powerful, stayed relevant in this format, and it got some new tools. So it kind of tooled its way a little bit away from its Earth sub-package of Viserys into full-on Thunder package. It's running Mount Olympus now. It's running Race to the Top. 2 new relevant threats to be aware of. How do you stop Thunder Nexus? The classic Pandora's Box is always good. They run even more searches than they have in the past. Stopping Elichik, stopping Jolton are fantastic ways to slow the deck down and prevent them from doing what they want to do. Don't give them Zeus, don't give them Mount Olympus. They're a stadium deck now, so running your own stadium, or again, if you're a Thunder player, you can run a stadium Misenchanted to turn off Race to the Top if you don't have it online and you don't want them to have it online in the moment. Getting rid of their Mount Olympus, maybe you play your Race to the Top first, and then pop their Olympus with your Olympus, Misenchanted, so that they can't take advantage of theirs in the following turn. Additionally, this is going to sound weird, but a lot of people are already running Ash Rabbit in their deck, so a lot of people already have access to Thunder Spirits. You're going to run Race to the Top in your side deck against Thunder Nexus. So having 2 Race to the Top in your side deck, maybe even 3 if there's a lot of Thunder Nexus running around, to be able to take advantage of their Mount Olympus when you're running any other element is A, hilarious, and B, actually relevant because it's a cheap, efficient removal against a defensive deck that's going to run maybe 1 Ash Rabbit out, 2 Ash Rabbit out. Being able to go, I target your 2 Elestrals and pop one with Race to the Top with your Mount Olympus in play is really actually efficient and effective. So it's actually not a terrible idea to run Race to the Top in your side deck. But be aware that if your opponent knows that you're side decking that, because it is kind of an interesting tech that people have been trying out, they might just play Race to the Top and then use like Ambrosia or Nectar of the Gods to knock out their Olympus before passing turn. So it might still be a dead card, but it's something to think about. So again, Pandora's Box is great, stopping the searching, playing your own stadium, and just drop a race to the top on your Thunder player. It's hilarious, and it actually is kind of effective. Another interesting new deck of the format, Fire. Fire is good now, question mark? So why is the Fire deck good real fast? It has access to Lavalith, an element, and Chains of Prometheus, also an element. So those are two really powerful counter rune interaction options that unfortunately kind of defend each other. So Lavalith kind of is weak to Poison Tipped Arrow, Tsunamis, and then Chains of Prometheus stops those options as well. So there's a little finickiness there that you might have to run into against Fire. So how do we counter those strategies? As I mentioned, against Lavalith specifically, Tsunamis are great, Poison Tipped Arrows are great, and a Stadium to keep your things buffed is also useful, but will turn on their Lavalith, so it's double-edged sword there. But if you have a Stadium in play and they can't out it, and they play Lavalith, or they're worried about back row, and they can't out your Stadium, you could create a defensive wall for your Elestrals with like an Ash Rabbit in defense to help defend that. Otherwise, Invoke Removal, always a decent option against Lavalith. Altar Stars, anything that can change it from being able to attack, because the biggest threat of Lavalith is it going on board and 2-for-1ing right away, making you have to play a third card to get rid of it. So if you can reduce how many cards that it hits and get rid of Lavalith ASAP, Fire does lose a little bit of the late game options because they don't have a ton of way to kind of keep digging for cards, setting up back row, etc. It's very much an aggressive deck. Do watch out for those eruptions. Maybe bring one Fire Spirit as well against Lavalith. And if you're running against Chains of Prometheus, Thunderstorm. Honestly, Thunderstorm's not a bad option against Fire. Again, the Fire decks are pretty aggressive. They do drop some spirits on board. They will recover you some spirits with their Chains of Prometheus. Running a Thunderstorm to knock out maybe a Fire Stadium that they might play, or a back row card to get ready for your own counter runes can be pretty useful. So I do think having rune removal at invoke speed that Fire can't really interact with easily is a good option. So try Thunderstorm, try Divine Blessing, So try Thunderstorm, PTAs, etc. Invoke Removal. It's a little bit more of a sturdy deck that doesn't have a ton of great options, but it's not as explosive as some of the other decks we've already talked about. And last but not least, we'll talk about Wind. Now, I don't have a ton of things to say about Wind. There's not a ton of it floating around the meta, but it's still a pretty relevant deck in two forms. You have your toolbox going into Pantera, and then you also have Flammoth to worry about a little bit. So let's talk about Flammoth. That's the new kid on the block, and again, I have less to say about it. There's not a ton you can do about when they get the Flammoth out, and it is possible for them to go in one turn, just drop a Flammoth on you. So what are the best ways to deal with Flammoth in your side deck? And unfortunately, the answer is generally run a lot of Invoke Removal, so that you can do two in the same turn. If you get rid of Flammoth, they'll basically be going down 2 to 3 cards to get it out. So if you throw 2 Invoke Runes out of Flammoth, their deck is going to be a little dead in the water for a couple turns because they'll have to find a new Flammoth to get out. They're not running Charcoon. They're going to try to hard cast it from their hand using things like Tower of the Winds. So being able to stop Tower of the Winds is the second option you have. If you're going first and you can set up for a Divine Blessing, that's another good way to stop Flammoth from getting out quick enough. And then lastly, it's a Wind deck, run Pandora's Box. Straight up, Pandora's Box, Divine Blessing, and just running Invoke Runes is your best bet against Flammoth. If they get Flammoth out, you're in for a bad time. But if you can deal with Flammoth by casting 2 runes at the same time to out it, they're generally not going to be able to get it back into play, and they burnt a lot of spirits and a lot of cards to get it out. So be aware that it might feel bad to throw 2 Earthquakes at a Flammoth so that it negates one and then dies the other. That might be the best way to deal with it on board. So prevent it from getting bored. P-Box to stop searches, and Divine Blessing to stop Tower of the Winds. 2 big things you can do, as well as you always have Gorgons on hand to stop Ascensions from happening. So that is about it for decks that you're probably going to be consistently running against that I wanted to highlight because those are pretty relevant meta decks right now. We don't know really where they're going to land in the tiers and who's going to take the event, but best of 3 is relevant and side decks are super relevant. So take a look at these cards. If you guys have any options for your own side deck options, let me know as well. I think I covered a pretty interesting gambit of cards here, including Divine Blessing, Stadium, Divine Blessing. There's other options, obviously, but be aware of what you're playing against and what your matchups are so you can bring things against the matchups you're weak against. That's what your side deck is for, and good luck to you in the tournament. I'll see you in the next video. And again, if you want to support me and you're buying Elestrals products from shopelestrals.com, check out my referral link below. I always appreciate it. And I'll see you guys in the next one.